President Donald Trump is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House next week, the first meeting for both leaders since President Trump took office.
And it comes amid new tension in the Middle East after Israel passed a controversial law retroactively legalizing thousands of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The White House initially warned Israel about the settlements, but after the ruling, has decided to take a wait-and-see approach.
Ilan Goldenberg is the director of the Middle East Security Program at the Center for a New American Security. Good to have you.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's break down the White House's apparent change of heart on this issue. What do you make of it?
Basically looking at the settlements issue, we've seen this shift from what was originally total silence to now coming out and making a statement with at least some very delicate criticism of Netanyahu and the Israeli government, but honestly, not much of a shift. I don't necessarily look at it as a change of heart. They still essentially are saying you can build almost anywhere in the West Bank, just don't start any new settlements. That gives the Israelis flexibility to do almost anything they want, and is a pretty dramatic shift from the Obama administration, which took a very hard line on settlements across the board.
So if this ruling is upheld in Israeli courts, do you think it gives Netanyahu and President Trump an opportunity as cover to just expand settlement activity?
Well, I think most likely what's going to happen is the law is almost certainly going to be struck down in Israeli courts, which then means we'll be back to not building these new settlements, which I think is probably a good thing, because there's this sort of dichotomy in Trump's approach. On the one hand, he wants to make a deal. He's talked about this being the ultimate deal. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to come into any kind of conflict publicly with Netanyahu, who he views as a close partner, and wants to portray a view that's very different than what the Obama administration did.
Let's turn to Iran. You recently wrote an article entitled, "Is Trump Trying to Tweet Us into a War with Iran?" That's pretty scary. And you wrote this: even if the Trump administration wants to walk away from the nuclear agreement or provoke the Iranians to walk away, criticizing the deal was unwise. So how should the United States then respond to any perceived threats by Iran? And even you saw today Khamenei saying what he did.
So part of what the Trump administration has done is taken a hard line on regional issues such as Yemen, the ballistic missile test. That's fine. I agree with that. That's what we should be doing. And if they want to say things like that, that's okay. But at the same time, you also don't necessarily want to criticize the nuclear agreement. They've sent mixed messages on this. On the one hand, you've seen the Trump administration say, we're going to respect the deal. On the other hand, by publicly criticizing it, they're isolating the United States from Russia, Europe, all of our other key partners.
But getting Russia and China on this Iran nuclear deal was a big deal. And indications are that Russia wants to stick with this deal as well. How hard would it be to completely unravel this deal?
So I actually compare the Iran deal oftentimes to the Affordable Care Act. You can talk real tough about wanting to unravel it, but then you get in and you realize, wait a minute, this isn't just a deal between the United States and Iran. This is a deal between the United States and all of the great powers. And I think it's going to be very difficult for them to unravel it. And the only way to unravel it successfully is to try to put the blame on Iran, which I don't think is possible when you're out there being very militant and threatening and putting the Iranians on notice.
You also weighed in on President Trump's claim that the media is not covering terrorism enough, a claim which has been debunked. Here at CBS News, we covered almost 3/4 of those attacks on the list. Other news organizations did as well. Rena and I have both covered terrorist attacks in our careers in places, I have to say, that most Americans don't care about. Thousands of people have been killed in West Africa by acts of terror with groups affiliated with ISIS. You can report on them all day long. Whether or not people are interested in them is another story. You tweeted this: asking the media to shine more light on terror attacks is essentially asking press to do a better job of spreading terrorist propaganda, which is an interesting point, because in bringing this up, what we're doing now is talking about all of these attacks that have happened, to the extent that the ones that they had on the list actually did happen.
Right. I mean, and that is part of the problem, right? The whole point of terrorism is to try to draw the media in, is to try to create as much publicity as possible around the act itself. So even if you have a small act that kills only a few people, you have this huge concern and anxiety across the country because of the media coverage, and then that spawns an overreaction. The perfect example is being San Bernardino, where obviously a tragic incident where 15 people were killed, but 15 people, does that merit a Muslim ban of hundreds of thousands of people? No. And what are the consequences of that immigration policy now for America's perception of the United States across the globe? So we need to be doing more to actually try to put terrorist acts in the proper context, and that's what the press needs to be trying to do. And what the White House is essentially asking you to do is put more focus on it, elevate the problem, make people more scared. That's the opposite of what we should be doing.
Ilan Goldenberg, thank you for joining us, Ilan.
Thank you for having me.